Hello, Madfest. We are live, or rather in front of a live audience here at Madfest on the DigiAd stage. I have a rather special set of guests I'm going to introduce in a moment. But first, let me set up why we're here. So, connecting the festival's theme of Riders of the Storm with the macro reality facing consumers, brands, and citizens, with the need and desire for responsible advertising, we're bringing together leading industry voices here on the DigiAd stage at Madfest to get into responsible advertising, what it is, why it matters now more than ever. So, can you please give a big Madfest DigiAd stage welcome to our special guest today, Jake Dubbins. Jake is the founder of the Conscious Advertising Network and insists in his rider that he's introduced like that. You should see the rest of it. Boy, howdy. And we have Hannah Mirza, founder of the Responsible Marketing Agency, sorry. It's got responsible in the name. And last but by no means least, it's Laura Wade. Not in Laura's rider, but I thought I'd do it anyway. Global Head of Sustainability Strategy at EssenceMediaCom. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to our audience for coming. So, let's get into it. Hannah, coming to you first. How are brands thinking about responsible advertising? What is it, and what kind of action are they taking?
Thanks, Ben. So, in my mind, it's made up of a few different things. So if we start with the governance layer, it's all about brand safety. It's about how we use data. It's how we think about being ethical in the use of data. It's making sure we have the right context and layers of kind of governance in place to make sure we're doing the right things. And then what I think, we've spent a lot of money and time and energy getting to the place in our industry where we've got this responsible baseline. And in the last few years, we've now got people talking about what are the things that are going to raise the ceiling. And we're getting into the social, we're getting into the environmental side of responsible marketing. And so on the environmental side, it's a lot of talk and kind of ambition around carbon decarbonization across the supply chain of media and marketing. And then on the social side, we're thinking a lot about inclusion and diversity and how we are having true reach with our marketing efforts and making sure that when we're buying reach, we're actually reaching all pockets of society, even the niche pockets, even the kind of people that aren't necessarily consuming mainstream media.
So this is this whole kind of inclusion versus exclusion thing with targeting, right? Or is that something different?
I think it's that, absolutely.
So, Jake, we're going to come to you now. Broaden this out for us. Like, why does it matter to be responsible? You and your co-founder Harriet set up the can to help make effective change for the industry and address some of these issues. Talk us through what you found. Talk us through why it matters.
I think we in advertising often live in a bubble. We talk about sort of sitting in an ivory tower in advertising, and I think that we don't often enough look outside into society, into what is actually going on around us and our influence on that, both in terms of what we fund through advertising in our media, but also the fact that we are architects of desire and the drivers of the consumption economy. I think, one of the things that we try and do is bring together a big tent and bring together civil society groups, activists, climate scientists, social cohesion scientists, all sorts of different people to really bring a bit of perspective into advertising. And why it matters, part of the reason why I set up the Conscious Advertising Network was I met Harriet, but a couple of months before that, my neighbour had been badly beaten up in East London in a racist attack in a pub. Landlord was also beaten up as well.
Oh, man.
So I I didn't witness it, but I sort of saw firsthand the aftermath of that and sort of wondered what was going on and where that sort of racist hate came from. And then the latest, figures from the well-known hippies at the Home Office have demonstrated that hate crime against, based on race, on sexuality, on gender, is climbing massively in the last year. So, and we fund the information ecosystem. We fund, the platforms, we fund media, we fund, pretty much everything. And it's an investment as well as a driver for brand, brand awareness, sales, brand sentiment, the long and short of it, and everything that we talk about. So I think it's really important to look at, what our media, what our investments, what our advertising is funding. And also, obviously, on that, that massive problem that isn't spoken enough about, I know we are talking more and more, but climate. And I always kind of say this sentence, and I'm always shocked that people aren't sort of running around waving their hands around, because, the IPCC, the well-known, body that represents scientists around the world, came out at the beginning of the year saying that we are facing a rapidly closing window to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. So yeah, that is all of us. That's our kids, that's our families, and so on. And we fund at scale climate misinformation. We're also guilty of, or have been guilty of, greenwashing. And also, we're working on behalf of high carbon industries. So, all of this stuff means that we have to recognize our influence, recognize our role, and in what is actually happening out there.
So I think we'll maybe broaden the conversation into sort of issues of trust washing more generally as we go on. But I want to take something from what you're saying, and then Hannah, how you started us off. Obviously, advertisers, brands are doing lots of work around building frameworks, but Jake, you're saying there's a specific imperative around the investment. There's a more active role, perhaps, that brands and folk in the industry can play.
Yeah, definitely. I think we can, these are investments, these are choices that we can make. And for a long time, we have relied a little bit too much on what the machines can do and what the machines can optimize towards. And I think there's a bit of a return to sort of good old media planning. Now, both in terms of...
Controversial.
I know, right? In terms of the investment...
Media planning, Jake.
Yeah, but we're, maybe programmatic not being the solution to all is not necessarily
it's like AI now, isn't it?
But I think that we have a role to play in both creating the sort of information ecosystem and news agenda that we want to see. So investing in great quality news, great quality journalism, diverse voices, pluralistic media, but also making sure that we are recognizing the threat of monetized and weaponized climate misinformation, hate speech, and everything in between.
So Laura, I'm going to come to you now. You're a leader in this industry, in this space, in thinking around making effective change. Mm-hmm. Can you talk us through maybe a little bit about your journey and then how folks should feel and what they can do?
Yeah, I suppose my journey was very much, to Jake's point, I was looking at trends. I worked in content and innovation, and I was looking at the trends in society and what was happening in culture, and it was just really obvious that the biggest change is sort of the ecological crisis alongside the climate crisis, alongside constant social crisis. And it was like, how do I square this with what I'm doing and what I'm talking about at work? So I actually actively pitched to my CEO and said, I think the future of our industry needs to change, and I think we need to be driving a new narrative and a new agenda. And luckily he agreed. So off I went. I went and studied a short course at Cambridge, and then came back with a business plan, and have gradually moved into my role and really sort of advocated for change within the agency, but also within the industry as well. And yes, there's a lot of talking at the moment, there's a lot of conversations, but I'm really hoping this is the year of action.
I think we can all agree with that. And one of the reasons that I think you're such a wonderful panel to have on is, Jake, you talked about how we're often a little bit of a bubble in the industry, right? It feels like if you go to events, every other panel sometimes is talking about these big issues. Rightly so, because there's conversations that need to be had and there's changes that need to be made. But the three of you are actually examples or actually developing ways of changing the industry. Hannah, you've founded an agency, you've done a lot of work with, I also believe, sort of brands on creating these frameworks. You heard from Laura there how she's sort of been a bit of an entrepreneur and created a new role, and Jake bringing us together with civil society groups. So I think breaking out of the bubble is an important one to take there. So I'm going to come back to you now to ask. We talked a lot about the urgent change needed, and again, the big theme of MadFest is riders of the storm. Inflation, all of these challenges, but all of these opportunities. Have to say that, work in marketing. But coming back to challenges, what's the biggest issue in advertising right now? Hannah, I'm going to come to you first on that one.
Yeah, so for me, like I've been lucky enough recently to be working with the WFA on the creation of an action guide to reduce media greenhouse gas emissions. It was released at Cannes. It got a lot of coverage in the US press, but I don't think it's as well known in the UK yet. And what I love about this and what I think it's doing to address the biggest challenge is moving us from talking about an issue to taking action on an issue. So if you haven't read the guide yet, please go and download it. It's free to everyone. What we do need to do in the sustainability space is have free and equitable access to the change that we need to make. And it addresses, the big elephant in the room that we all need to start addressing, but we have to start eating bite by bite. And that is, what are the steps you can take? As consumers, we're starting to get conscious about the buying choices we make. And as businesses, we're in the business-to-business buying, marketplace. And so all the choices we make about all the suppliers we work with can be pivoted to work with sustainable suppliers. And in particular, some suppliers aren't sustainable today, and they need help on that journey. For example, we interviewed over 40 different contributors for the guide, and there's some spaces where you only have a choice of a couple of players. And so the role isn't to stop buying with them, but to help those players navigate towards more sustainable solutions for you and give them a runway of time to do that.
So the answer for the industry is it's a supply chain issue. That's where we're starting. Is it a supply chain issue?
I'm going to say imagination.
Okay.
Because I think we need to reinvent and reimagine what our industry stands for. So absolutely building on Hannah's points, they're foundational and they're building blocks. But I think if you we, like Jake's facts, we've known these facts for quite a few years now. This is a reality. We can see the impact of what's happening around the world, Canadian wildfires and what that had to, our colleagues in New York sending sort of apocalyptic pictures of that. Anywhere around the world, you can look at any moment and find proof that climate crisis is here. So it's really sometimes stumps me personally about where's the urgency, where's the response? And I think really it's because we're all really busy, we're all at capacity, and we're all doing what we do best, what we've learnt in our careers for the last 10, 20 years. Whereas actually I think we need to take time and step back and have a bit more imagination about what we could actually do and how we can. We're not going to fix the problem with the same attitudes and behaviours that we've had for the last 10 or 20 years. We need to think differently. And that's, again, why diversity is so critical and why having different voices in the room, but also seeing it as a really exciting opportunity. Like, what do we stand for? What can we drive? And what can we test? And, let's try and do something completely different and surprise ourselves.
I think, just to build on that, I think it's about, partly bringing the outside in, but also examining our own values, examining our own, our own consciences. I think one of the things that drives me personally is looking my kids in the eye. They're currently 11 and 8, and I want to answer their questions directly when they ask, Dad, what did you do? Because this stuff is happening now, far quicker than we thought it would. I think, building on Hannah's point, I think I completely agree that the building blocks are absolutely vital, but also to take people on a journey in our industry, that has to be based on good faith. And there are plenty of good faith actors out there, and I completely agree with Laura that this should be the biggest opportunity for this industry that we've seen in a generation. If businesses like to plan based on certainty, right? And if there's one thing that's certain, it's going to be the climate crisis. And it's the question is what is it going to do? How bad is it going to get? But it's definitely happening, and it's definitely coming. So that thing is certain. So that's a good thing for businesses because we can plan for it and actually put our shoulder to the wheel and actually work on the opportunities that it brings. There is an inevitability, despite opposition voices trying to push back against net zero, that the net zero economy is coming. And I think that those that embrace that, those who skill up, those who understand the regulations, understand the opportunity, and really drive creative power, media power at that opportunity, will do the best work that we've seen in a very long time. But it's definitely about who are the good actors that are genuine about that and taking them on that journey and partnering with them, but also questioning whether or not those that are not interested in meeting the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement, are we going to be involved in that? Because we're going to get we're going to get questioned in the future, not just by our kids, but by our peers and others about what did we do in this time.
I think there's, just building on that as well, I think the challenge is at the moment, everyone's being quite polite and playing nicely and sort of making out that there's an opportunity for us all to be winners. But like you say, I think that's going to change. There are going to have to be losers, because we need radical rehaul of our industry. So actually, you need to start building yourself into a position where you can be one of the winners, and you've driven that change. We're not all going to win in this situation. We can't, because we can't maintain the status quo.
Exactly.
No, creative destruction, important part of capitalism, in that we have it now. So yeah, I think that's an important point, is that there will be winners, and there's such an opportunity for our industry. Jake, you started talking about how, we're kind of creators of culture in some ways. We take from culture a lot, and we create, ultimately, if this is going to sound very highfalutin for a podcast, but we're kind of architects of desire, right? So we have a responsibility within our industry to make this change.
Exactly, and the question is are we going to take that responsibility seriously and commit to it? That's the major question for this industry.
And again, like, one of the reasons that we wanted to do this panel with you guys, this is quite an inward industry discussing episode for us. Normally we're talking about media experience, but we wanted to do this to have that kind of inward discussion, but also to give examples of the change, right? So too often I think we have these panels, we have these discussions, and we kind of throw out some truisms, and we all feel bad about it, because rightly we should, but we need to build a path forward. And again, the three of you, and I'd encourage everyone to connect with these guys, check them out. The three of them are creating paths forward. So I want to kind of like broaden this discussion out again a little bit, and sort of talk about how, let's get back to this kind of idea of inclusivity and our responsibility for funding a sort of media ecosystem. Here on the Meaningful Media podcast, we talk about media, we talk about the media ecosystem, we talk about something called media experience. So how do people feel about the media they're consuming? What are they watching, reading, listening to, etc.? Can you talk about the opportunities and responsibilities we have in that space? Hannah, I'm going to come to you first in terms of some of the work you've been doing with the WFA and some of the work you've done previously.
Yeah, so, this one's hot topic for me is women's representation in sport and programming. If you started television programming or broadcasting today on sport, would you have just 6% coverage for women's sport? It's absolutely astounding today that that's how much airtime women's sports get. But we kind of continue this because the women's sports compete for programming with the men's sports. The times are the same, and there's just not the funding, there's not the coverage. We're in this catch-22. So if we think about diversity and inclusion in terms of representation in the media and in programming and where advertisers are investing, unfortunately, there just isn't the opportunities. And we're in this kind of chicken-egg scenario where not just on women, but on LGBTQIA+, on multicultural, on positive age representation, on disability representation, there just isn't the content, there just isn't the kind of opportunity to put as much funding there as going to kind of other places. And I think it's about changing the support for owned and minority businesses to get that coverage out there, but it's also about changing the mainstream. And I think it's incumbent on all of us in the industry to be putting the pressure on the producers, on the programs, on the way our media planning and buying takes place, and also really just forensically looking at what am I investing in, what am I spending on, and is it the right place, and is it truly representative of the diverse culture that we live in the society of Britain. I myself am Australian, but I've lived here for 20 years. I'm in a mixed race family. My kids are mixed race, my husband's Asian, but I don't see representation for them in mainstream media, and I don't see representation for a lot of my friends and colleagues in mainstream media still. And I think that's the big thing that I'd love to see change.
Yeah, I think that the women in sport and that sort of number, that 6%, is just shows how radical again that we need to be. And I think also we need to look at ourselves and our cultural sort of upbringing and try and break those patterns. Like I'm a football fan. I grew up playing football. I'm a Plymouth Argyle fan actually. So I've grown up playing football, and I always default, just because I'm used to it, to watching men's football. My daughter has regularly said, "Dad, why aren't we watching women's football?" And I'm like, damn, yes, of course, right. And then purposefully gone and found, when the next, women's, the Arsenal game's on, for example. And obviously we watch the women win the Euros. But I think it needs so mainstreaming it, even those of us who kind of want to watch it and so on, but we're hardwired culturally not to, because it wasn't part of our upbringing. I think it needs radical change and radical presence and leadership from broadcasters. I know brands are coming into it and spending money in it, but I think it needs to be much more radical, much quicker, so we see much more representation for not just, our women and girls, but for men to look at that and to have women as their heroes who score the goal in the final, for example.
And just kind of building on that, there was this amazing campaign that won a Cannes Lion, which was just about fantasy football. And, the fact in Australia there was a campaign where you were allowed to pick men and women players for your fantasy football team. And the scoring was a combination of two. And so suddenly there was this spike in interest, because it wasn't like I chose between the women's sport, I chose between the men's sport. In my fantasy football, I had players from both kind of genders able to be participating. And it was incredible. If you haven't seen the work, look it up.
That's really interesting. I should just take a moment to acknowledge, I'm a cis white, increasingly middle-aged guy. So, I'm operating from a certain perspective and privilege. Like, we all need to do the work to understand and be better allies without, I think, asking too much emotional labour of those sharing their lived experience. But I'm reminded of some work we did with BETC in Paris around gaming, where quite a simple campaign, but it's or I say simple, but quite a simple insight, I should say, which was to swap the animations for male and female characters in gaming, and it kind of showed something really interesting, that there was like a level of a certain framing of female characters and the way they moved in gaming, and that led to some women and girls not necessarily feeling comfortable with gaming, right? And what's interesting is, like, there are many, many female gamers, right? So those issues of not only there not being enough support for the media out there, there just not being enough, but those issues of kind of inclusive representation, again, cis white guy, right? So how do we feel about that representation in the media?
I think, speaking as another cis white guy, it's involving
I think
women.
I think we should stop speaking now.
Yeah, probably. It's involving people at the concepting of these games. I mean, we're talking, for example, everybody's banging on about AI. Who's creating AI? It's about who is creating these platforms, the games, the culture, the broadcasting, and if it isn't representative at the top and at those creating it, then the content isn't going to be representative.
I think this is a random fact that I'm pulling out of my brain from a few years ago when I did work on a gaming client, and I think, and I'm not going to quote stats, it'll be totally made up, but what they also found is that female avatars are more likely to get beaten up as well. So so there was more violence towards female avatars because they were perceived as weaker potentially. So not only did you have this situation where potentially you could have female designers and have more representative feminine of any kind sort of features, but they were more likely to be attacked in that sort of open gameplay environment. And I think that's something we also need to be aware of, in terms of it's not just about recreating and creating sort of equity, it's about realising that there are going to be repercussions of that, and how do you protect the group that you're trying to put forward and include more. I think, do you see what I mean? It's not as simple as more female designers, more female avatars, job done. I think we have to think about, again, what's out in the world and how people are interacting with that. And back to your point about why content and news is so important, because it shapes how people react and interact with each other as well, even virtually or in the real world.
Thanks, Laura. That was really, really interesting. It was really strong. There's so much work to do, so much insight to share. I think we could go longer, and maybe we will again. But we're coming up for time, so we end every episode of the Meaningful Media podcast with your Meaningful Media Fast 5. So we're going to close out here. Are you ready? They're not ready.
We're ready.
Okay, Hannah's ready. Hannah, I'm coming to you first. Ready? She's ready. She's definitely ready. Okay. What is your Meaningful Media right now?
I love a podcast, and I've just gotten into
Absolutely.
the Media Storm, which is telling kind of stories from the lived experiences of the people who are part of the media topic, and I think that's really fascinating. Get into that podcast. Highly recommend.
What's the media you start your day with?
Definitely, probably just I've curated my Apple News fairly well, and make sure that they get a broad perspective of different things there.
What media do you turn to when you're looking to get inspired?
I'm a big follower of the Guilty Feminist podcast as well, and I feel that gives me quite a lot of positive energy.
Yeah. What's your media guilty pleasure?
I love the channels on Snapchat, and I've been known to probably peruse far too much celebrity entertainment in there.
Interesting admission. Okay, you can have one media platform for the rest of your life. Which one is it and why?
It would have to be one of the independent media owners, or one where there's kind of focus on the narrative from kind of an independent perspective. So probably The Guardian or something like that.
Guardian. Jake, you're up next. What's your Meaningful Media right now?
Tediously on a podcast, I'm going to go podcast as well.
Podcasts,
So
podcasts are the best
The
media.
news agents, I think.
Almost as good as this one.
Yeah, news agents.
What's the media you start your day with?
I'm similar to Hannah. I kind of look at a variety of different news sites to get an idea of what's going on. So Guardian, BBC, Mail, Telegraph, to see what the Telegraph are talking about in their anti-net zero crusade. Various other things.
Well, Telegraph, of course, bankrupt and about to be sold, right? So who knows?
Correct.
Maybe there's going to be a change in editorial direction. What media do you turn to when you're looking to get inspired?
Music, because I kind of want to think. So Spotify, I listen to a lot of different sort of music on Spotify, so I therefore have time to think on a train.
Human or AI curated playlists, or have you got...
Human, yeah.
Interesting.
I kind of pull in stuff and,
Interesting.
over the years.
Human curation. What's your media guilty pleasure?
It's not a guilty pleasure. We've been watching Glow Up quite a lot on TV, which if you haven't noticed, if you don't know, is a brilliant makeup sort of. It's the standard, format, but it's genius. All the family love it. It's brilliant.
Well, this is an audio medium, but our audience can see, Jake, that you've had something of a glow up yourself.
Sweating.
Okay, you've got one media platform for the rest of your life. Which one is it and why?
God, that's really difficult. A post-Musk Twitter.
Ooh, okay, interesting. Laura, bring us home. You ready?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, go on then.
Okay. What's your Meaningful Media?
Podcast I love, From What If to What Next by Rob Hopkins, which is an amazing podcast about if we actually achieve what we set out to achieve by 2030. So it's got time travel in it.
Ooh.
Ooh.
Check it out.
Makes me feel very positive.
Okay. What's the media you start your day with?
If I'm commuting to London, it'll be a podcast. If I'm at home, probably Paw Patrol. Because that's my 4-year-old's choice.
You say that. I'm getting quite into Bluey at the moment.
Bluey's good.
Yeah.
Bluey's really good.
Yeah.
The best export from Australia in a long time.
Well, since, So, what media do you turn to when you're looking to get inspired?
LinkedIn. Mainly because I follow you. No, not really.
We follow each other. So.
Yeah. No, I actually really like an activist called Clover H.
Yeah.
I just, again, getting out of that bubble, I do find LinkedIn is great. One, for the activists and being called out by them, which is, really insightful and make sure we stay on our toes. But also all the great people like Hannah that share articles and white papers.
Follow us all on LinkedIn. We'll follow you. We'll all follow each other. It'd be great. What is your media guilty pleasure?
I love Queer Eye. Yes, Queen. Yes.
I think everyone in the audience does as well.
Yeah, JVN. I've actually seen him live. Awesome.
We will talk about that after the podcast. Okay, you've got one media platform for the rest of your life. Which is it and why?
Podcasts.
Yes.
But it has to be, because I feel like podcasts are that currency that you have a conversation and someone recommends something. And again, it's that diversity of thought. And I'm naturally quite curious. I love it. Podcasts all the way.
Thank you so much to our guests today, Laura Wade, Hannah Mirza, Jake Dubbins. This has been a special episode of the Meaningful Media Podcast live here on the Digiad stage at MadFest. Thank you to our audience. Give it up.